Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Writer's Room. Tonight we're discussing radio plays with Michael Long from Webster University. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about what got you interested in radio plays.
Well, actually, it was when I was at the university a long time ago. I was taking some courses in acting and directing for theater and just in general interested in stories and storytelling. And one of our professors happened to work at the BBC for a time and put forth the idea that maybe we could perform on the campus radio stage a radio play. And she ran a few independent studies with us and helped us to write the scripts and told us about how to add sound effects to that and make it an interesting and lively and evocative play rather than just sort of a real talky sort of thing. So that was it. And in those days, we were actually performing them live on a little 10-watt radio station. So that was the excitement too, that you knew what was going out was what people were going to hear. And we didn't have any chance to edit later. So just like live TV in its day. So
how long did you do that?
For a couple of years when I was at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And always had a love for that. And but when I left there was really no venue for it. I think I tried a little bit. There was somebody over at Washington University who they had a little radio show, and I wrote a few scripts for them. And we just for fun, just to kind of keep my hand in it. And it just sort of went dormant then for a number of years until finally I came across a story that my brother had translated from French, which was kind of a creepy a French, I guess, supernatural tale. And my first thought was, could we make this a film? And I wrote a screenplay for it. And then I thought, well, probably never get the funds for the film, but I can certainly do a radio play. You can do that on a shoestring budget. All you need is to find the sound effects and get some canned music, or make your own music for that matter, and find some actors. So the whole enterprise probably cost $100 maybe or less.
And when was that?
We recorded that 2 years ago.
Okay.
And put it together. It took a little while to edit it. And yeah, so I was happy with it. It turned out to be about a 30-minute production.
Okay, so for those who are interested in trying to write radio plays, what are some of the differences of that between some other kind of writing?
Let's see, differences. Well, I would say, first of all, it's like any other writing where every word has to count. And you really want to make sure you know what every word means and how it sounds when you say it. So maybe that's a difference too. You want to be euphonious. You want to make sure it appeals to the ear when you're saying the words. It might look good on paper as you write them, but say them aloud, and then you'll know if they'll work for radio or audio drama or not. The other thing is to save space for the actors to be able to interpret. They're going to bring their voice and their character to every word you write, and they will give an inflection to it that maybe you didn't even think of before. And that's kind of the fun part of it when you find out a role even gets bigger than you imagined it. So don't try to overwrite and over-direct it. Let the actors, give enough room for them to interpret what they're reading. And the other thing is you have to think about 4 elements when you're writing for radio. One is the dialogue, which we were just talking about, actors speaking parts. Then there is music, quite often music which will be either transitional music to take you in or out of a scene, or play under a scene while it's going on. Then there's sound effects, and that can be anything from just like tapping a teaspoon on a cup to indicate you're in a restaurant, to maybe a murmuring crowd of some kind. And then the fourth thing was what the BBC talks about on their websites is silence. Working in silence occasionally, pauses. Those can be very, very effective. As anyone knows who ever heard the original Orson Welles broadcast, War of the Worlds, the moment when the broadcaster was in the middle of describing the Martians landing and he gets cut off in mid-sentence, and Welles deliberately held the silence. He stretched the silence out uncomfortably long, and then they covered it again. So it was like, that trying to make it to sound like a real broadcast, and something went terribly wrong and they had to cover for themselves.
Okay, so I would assume that between writing this kind of drama and, say, a stage play, obviously here you're putting in the sound effects. Would there be other kind of differences between a stage play or a screenplay? Because you said you wanted to start this off as a movie script. So that
yeah. When I considered what a movie would take, you'd have to, the thing I was considering was the setting would have been a small town in southern France in the 1840s. There would be a statue of Venus involved. There would be probably characters in period costume. You might have horses and buggies and all kinds of things that you would need for a film. But in radio and audio, all you need to do is have a little sound effect here, a little suggestion of music here, and you've created an entire scene in the listener's mind. And it's really much more powerful, I think, maybe than even showing them, by suggesting what that scene, where you are in the scene and what's there. There's a certain coziness to it. I think it's intimate the way a novel is intimate, because when you read a novel, you have to put costumes on all the characters, and you have to create the setting given what the novelist is telling you about it. And it's similar to that in radio. We give you certain elements, and then you're assembling them in your mind. So it's very intimate that way.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I hear you saying is when you're writing, you need to think about the ultimate, I guess, the end product. So if you were writing for like a play where the stage was like the size of a desktop, because maybe that was the size of the room, you wouldn't want to have a cast of thousands, right? So I kind of hear you're thinking about, I would have to have the 1840s and in France and everything, but on radio, I can just suggest that with maybe music or something with it. Whereas if I actually took it to film, then that involves a lot more props and scenery and cinematography and things that might be much more difficult to put together.
Right. Which is what film does well. I mean, film does very good at taking you to those places and showing you things as if they existed. But with radio, you can do the same thing. It's just in the person's mind, and you don't have to spend all that money or take a trip to France. You can get the same result, or maybe even a better result in some ways. When you said cast of thousands, it made me think that also the difference in radio is you don't want to have a large cast. You usually want to keep it down to perhaps 3, 4, maybe 6 people who are main characters, because it's difficult to keep track of them when you're just listening to them. Mm-hmm. And also when you cast the members who are in your troupe, in your cast, you want to make sure their voices are distinct enough and different enough that you're not confusing one for the other because they sound too similar. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But yes, you can do great things. You can do a lot of great things with just a small cast and a small budget.
And I would think if they were talented voice actors, then somebody could do more than one voice, and you might be able to double up some things.
Quite often, yeah. You will have in the scripts I've seen too, that they'll say, this character can play these other characters, so to make sure that they're not in the same scene at the same time. Mm-hmm. And a good talented actor will be able to do that. And you can also, of course, when you're editing, if you're putting it together, it's not a live show, but you're gonna edit it later. You can also alter the voices somewhat. You can change the tempo, and you can change the pitch of the voice. So there are ways to even make them more distinct if they weren't as distinct in the beginning.
So when you were looking for sound effects, did you find someone to be like the sound person, or did you find sound effects on a CD or a tape or whatever and use them from there? Or now on the internet you can certainly search for like copyright-free sound effect libraries. Right. But where did you find yours?
Well, I happened to get a free trial, or not a free trial, but a very low-cost trial to a subscription company. And I wasn't so much interested in the sound effects, because as you say, you can find a lot of sound effects out there. But finding good music, bridge music, transitional music, or just even mood music, which you also control the copyright of, is a little different. And this particular place handled both of them, and for that one yearly fee, which I think as an introduction it was like $50 or something, you could download as many sounds and musical tracks as you wanted for that whole year, and they were yours to use forever in whatever, you could reuse them in other projects if you wanted to. So that was great, and I would just go through and listen to their online catalog. I would do a search. Sometimes the search engines aren't that great. You have to do multiple ways of searching to make sure you're covering the area. But I would just go through, and I would quickly listen. And sometimes I would hear something and think, that sounds like I could use that in that scene. Or maybe for another project too. If I'm even downloading for one project, I might be thinking ahead to another project and say, oh yeah, that'll be good for that project eventually. So I put it in its own file for that later. And sometimes the music will also help suggest more of what the writing should be too, so that you can play off of those things as you're going through. I wouldn't wait to the very end to start collecting your music and sound effects. Writing, but while you're writing, you can be doing that because they can work together.
Yeah, and you can even like work, I guess, against type in a way, because I think one of the most, I don't know, maybe I don't want to say most effective, but an effective way to use music. I always think of the movie Poltergeist, where the main theme of it really sounds like a music box, But but instead of sounding happy, it makes you creeped out because of it doesn't match, I guess, what's going on the screen in a way.
Yes.
So you have this innocence in the music, but the screen has got a horror movie on it.
Right. Yeah. So don't always think about what this thing is supposed to portray. Think about maybe it will play against what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a happy theme, but maybe it's creepier because it is supposed to be a happy theme and it's in an unhappy story, an unhappy situation.
Sure.
I think of Hitchcock's film Strangers on a Train. One of the murders takes place at a carnival. And you're listening to all these happy people and happy carnival sounds in the background while this guy is approaching his victim. And it's very good as a counterbalance or as a counterpoint.
So what would be the favorite one that you wrote that for a radio drama?
Well, I mean, the one that I wrote recently, I think is the favorite one because we actually finished it and produced it. There's some others. I have scripts in mind. Haven't been produced, but have been toying with them. And the other thing I like about radio is you can go to impossible places and do impossible things. So if you want to go into somebody's dream, you can do that in a radio play very easily. Just suggest a few things. How do you envision a person's dream? And then suddenly you're in it and things are happening to you while you're in somebody else's dream. And how would you do that in a film? I don't think it would be quite as effective. You could probably write about it in a novel, but a radio play will really let your imagination run wild. I always remember, I like to go back to some old-time radio because I learned a lot of it from listening to that. And this comedian of his day, Jack Benny, who many people will remember and some people won't know who that is at all. He had a radio program for the longest time before he was on television. And one of his running gags was if you ever need to pay out some money, he was known to be a stingy person as a character, but in real life he was very generous. If he had to pay out some money, he had to make a trip down to his vault. And they would go through this elaborate sounds of doors being unlocked and just many locks having to be opened before he could walk down. And I think it was guarded at one time with maybe a pool of alligators. And there was actually a guard down there who always wanted to know what year it was because he just was left down there guarding the vault. And of course they did it with echoes. So it's cavernous, just imagine all of these things. And it became a nice running gag because everybody could have fun imagining it.
So radio dramas used to be very popular. I guess TV kind of helped them lose popularity in a way. Because are there a lot? I know the BBC still does them.
Yes, the BBC still does it. We could have had radio going, but the TV stations, the radio, the studios and the companies seem to put a lot of their money the profits they were making in radio went into developing television, and then television just said, "Okay, radio, bye." Took off on its own, and it really abandoned that medium of radio, which is unfortunate. I mean, I still meet people who are eager to hear it, and I think there's a revival of it now. In fact, in the last 10, 20 years, if you go online, you can hear a lot of new productions and younger people doing it. So as podcasts mostly, but yeah.
Yeah, what even got me thinking about it as starting, I guess, maybe last September or October, I just started listening to a lot of YouTube channels where they have like creepypastas, right? And so those aren't even radio dramas. Those are just people reading stories. And there's no really video to go with it. It's like listening to a campfire story, you know?
Right.
And that's when I started thinking, well, gee, maybe I could just, get someone to read my work online because these people are doing it, right?
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, what if you did it even a little bit more interestingly and had multiple voices and some sound effects? And, oh, yeah, they used to do that, didn't they? So maybe, now is a time for things to kind of come back like that.
Yeah, I would hope so, because as I say, you don't need a big budget to do it. So you just have a creative imagination and a little flair for working with sound effects and editing a little bit. But you can even get that as open source software that'll let you do all the editing you want, and you can play with it and learn it. And it's really a nice way to approach it. And they don't have to be long either. They can be shorter pieces. They don't have to be 30 minutes.
Yeah, it surprised me a bit because the internet is pretty visual, Yeah. And here's channel after channel on YouTube where there are no visuals. You're just listening. They put up like a thumbnail picture, but there's no video, so you need to watch. I thought, well, gee, they're not even putting up video on the internet. They're just putting up audio. So that seems to be a thing that's taken off a bit. Some of these channels have 100,000 listeners or several 100,000 listeners, and so people are willing to listen.
Yeah, I know. My niece, for instance, a couple of years ago told me she got interested in some of these podcasts, and she would download them, and maybe she was doing something around the house that just required repetitive labor, but didn't require too much mental thinking. So she would listen to that while she was doing that, or maybe while she was driving somewhere. So I think people are finding, they find out they don't just have to sit there and stare at their computer to listen to the podcast. Take it with you, and whatever you're doing, it can accompany you.
Maybe we can give audiobooks some credit for that. I don't know, but they've been around for a little while, and people are getting used to listening to recordings while they just do housework or drive or whatever.
I remember on long trips many years ago when the audiobooks were out on cassettes, I would take them with me and listen, and it made the trip go a lot faster.
In the days when you could check them out at one truck stop, check them back in at another truck stop. You used to see those little kiosks where kind of like a red box, but it was cassettes of books.
Yeah, that's interesting. I used to check them out from the library and just be real careful with them, make sure they got back.
Yeah. So any final thoughts about radio dramas?
I'd say if anybody's thinking about trying it, to give it a go and try something short, maybe just do a 5-minute piece of some kind and see how that works. And if it catches on and you find it's really a creative and imaginative medium for you, then go with it and explore it, because there's a lot you can learn about it. And you'll find there's not too many books out there on it. I suppose there are tutorials online. The BBC has some nice material occasionally, but it's hard to learn it from just a book. There's not too many resources, but you learn it by doing it mostly, I think.
All right, thanks very much. So if you enjoyed this episode of Writer's Room, remember, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and then also hit that bell notification so you know when I upload more videos, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.